If you look at art from the 1700s in particular, and early 1800s, you would see white royalty, especially in Europe and even over here too. One common theme was to see white royalty, a white king or a prince or a duke or some type of white aristocrat with a young black servant boy with him in the painting. And the servant boy will be well dressed. Now understand, they were molesting those children. If you look at a lot of paintings, just Google Moorish servant child, and you'll see a lot of these little well-dressed boys in pictures with these white males. They're little eunuchs, the little buck-broken servants that they would have around. So they were doing that all the way back in the 1700s, 1800s, and over here, it became more sinister. And I've talked about the buck breaking that went on the plantations. We all know about the rapings of the black women, but one thing that's not talked about, all the rapings of the black men on these plantations. And understand this. The first documented sex change happened during slavery. In fact, it happened down in New Orleans. This was the first documented sex change where there was a white female slave owner. And let's be very clear, some of the white female slave owners were just as brutal, if not more brutal, than the white men. But down there in Louisiana, there was a white female slave owner, Madame Lalaurie. This woman was a monster. Her mansion that she kept her black slaves in, it's still down there in New Orleans. I think it's over there in the French Quarters, Madame Lalaurie. This woman was a slave owner, and she's listed in history as a serial killer because this woman was murdering her black slaves and she was dismembering her black slaves. As a matter of fact, the television show American Horror Story, they did an episode based on this woman. They had Kathy Bates playing her, if you guys watched that show. I know my wife watched that show. Her name is Madame Lalaurie, Lalaurie, Madame Lalaurie. She was a French woman, and this woman would do experiments because her husband was a doctor too, so they would decapitate the slaves. They would tear off their limbs. There would be slaves in the attic with their eyes gouged out. This woman would do all types of vile, vicious things to her black slaves. There was one female slave where they broke all of her limbs and reset her body so she would look like a crab. There was one black female slave that they peeled her skin back. I mean, they kept people alive doing this stuff. And it was documented that one of the black male slaves, they took his genitals and turned him into a woman. They did a sex change operation and turned him into a woman. This is documented. I want you to Google this. One female slave who was 12 years old, she was brushing Madame Lalaurie's hair. She made a mistake and caught a snag in her hair. So Madame Lalaurie was about to beat the child, and the child ended up jumping out of a window and dying. And this is all documented. The child was buried on the grounds, and I think Madame Lalaurie only got fined $300. They were doing stuff like putting animal feces in slaves' mouths and then sewing their mouths shut. This is some sick stuff that was going. This was sick for that day. There was a slave who was 70 years old who was chained to a stove. There's a female slave. So the female slave tried to commit suicide by burning the house down. She set a fire. So the house caught on fire. Then the firemen came and the community came, and they were trying to get all the valuables out the house. And there was a particular room that Madame Lalaurie did not want them going into, but they ended up breaking the door down, and they saw all of these black people living in cages, being hung up, their arms missing, the sex changes. They found all of these black people mutilated. You understand? And then this is how they found out about how dangerous this woman was. And she was so vicious, the white people actually ran her out of town. And this is New Orleans. You got to understand how vicious somebody is for the white people to run you out of town. They ran her back to France. And people talk about how that mansion is still haunted to this day. But white people ran her out of town. And New Orleans had some of the most vicious white supremacist slave owners out there. If you get ran out of town by other white people, you're really doing the most. You're really doing the damn most, because the French, they were known for all of that real vile, violent shit. And also, a lot of them were still salty for being beaten by the Haitians. So they felt a certain way about that. So they were still salty about that. But it was some pure evil going on. The shit that this woman was doing was overtly evil for even that day. But just the sex changes and all this stuff, the mutilation of our genitals. See, they were doing that stuff on these plantations. And from what I understand, that mansion, Nicolas Cage owns that mansion today. Nicolas Cage, from what I understand, he owns that place now. You understand? But go check out American Horror Story. They talked about that. They talked about it. But that just goes to show you how vile these people are when it came to our sexuality. It always goes down to sexuality. They always got to do experimental things with us sexually. And just like when they would lynch black people because cutting off our genitals and doing things to our genitals, this was a normal thing with the white supremacists. They would lynch black people and castrate them. That was the main thing. The castration, that was the main event. Not the hanging, but the castration. And when you look at images during Jim Crow, just like the one on your screen right now, if you're looking at your screen, this image was very common. During the Jim Crow era, they would put these objectifying images of black people and particularly black children. One image that they would do of black children, they would always show black children, particularly black babies, in sexualized connotations. Like this image here, they got three black children, and two of them are almost making out with each other, and both of them have their buttocks exposed. This was a common theme with postcards. If you look at Google the term Black Americana, black babies, you would always see images of black babies with their asses out. And they would always have their asses looking abnormally big for a child. Children's asses ain't this big, but they would always make the buttocks of the child exaggerated and bigger than what it was supposed to look like for a child. This was almost a way of softcore porn. This was a way of taking away a child's innocence, because when you sexualize a child, what you're saying is that this child is less innocent. So when I harm this child, I am somewhat justified in doing so. So when I rape this child, this is the white supremacist mindset. Well, I'm justified in doing so because this child likes it. When they molest these children, well, these children, they deserve it because they like it. This is why they love showing images, even today, of black people and black young people twerking and dancing. That's the way to objectify black people. That's why it's not cute when you see children twerking and all that stuff. That's used to justify, to harm those children. You adultify the children by doing that. So when you practice systematic white supremacy, you shouldn't feel so bad for harming a child, because these aren't regular children. So this is why black children are punished more severely than white ones. This is why black children are tried as adults. You have 13 and 14-year-old kids tried as adults. Because when you sexualize children at a young age, you objectify them. There was one white LGBT guy. He's an activist. I want to get this guy's name. What's this guy's name? Hold on, I'm gonna find this guy's name while I'm talking. What is this guy's name? He's an activist. He was in San Francisco. Hold on, I'm gonna find his name real quick. Hold on one second. I want to find this guy's name while I'm talking. I know I'm not going to be able to find it now while I'm talking, but he was an activist in San Francisco. Let me see if I can find it real quickly. And he was a very well-respected LGBT activist. And this guy, he was charged with possession of child pornography. Okay, this is his name. Larry Brinken. Okay? He's a gay icon in San Francisco. Very well-respected white LGBT dude. Larry Brinken, that's his name. So a couple of years ago, they nailed him for having child pornography. And they pulled up some of his messages to other pedophiles, and there was obviously some images or videos of black babies getting raped by white men. And he said in the chat, he said, I love especially seeing the nigger 2-year-old getting nailed. There was a 2-year-old black child getting raped, and this asshole, Larry Brinken, look him up. He's a white LGBT dude. He texts, I love seeing the nigger 2-year-old getting nailed. This is the sick type of shit that we have out here. So he was getting off on seeing a black child being raped. Now, this was fairly recent. This was a couple of years ago. Larry Brinken, look that up. So, yeah, when you objectify black children, us getting raped, they get off on that. They get off on this type of stuff.